break down what's been happening here already. We do have our legal analyst, Elizabeth Wydra, here with us. And Elizabeth, I know that you've been watching as well. What have been some of the interesting things you have found from here today? I know that they've really been focusing on that timeline events leading up to January 6th.
Yeah, it's been interesting. They sort of have been leading up to, I think, the timeline of December 19th, because December 19th is when Trump put out that tweet that many might remember saying to come to DC on January 6th, it's going to be wild. And what was interesting and what we've heard so far is they talked with Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, which is kind of the most important lawyer to the president, to put it in the most simplest terms possible, and how he was very clear that there was no evidence of election fraud sufficient to change the outcome of the 2020 election. He thought that Trump should concede, and that all of the senior advisors to the president knew that to be true. They told the president that. And it led up to what was billed as the craziest meeting of the Trump presidency, which took place late at night in the White House, in various rooms of the White House, including culminating in the residence. And there was a screaming, profane fighting match between White House counsel Pat Cipollone, some of the other Trump lawyers, and Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell on the other side, arguing about what Trump should do. And in that meeting, I think what the committee is trying to do by describing that meeting is to show that Trump knew that there was no basis for these election fraud claims, these claims that the election was rigged or stolen. And he knew that his chief advisors, his White House counsel, were saying there is no evidence of this. You have folks like Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani continuing to push these lies, but they cannot ever come up with any evidence. And so Trump knew this. And as Rudy Giuliani is getting escorted off the premises by Mark Meadows, Trump's chief of staff, you then have Trump send out this late night tweet saying, come to Washington on January 6th.
And I think some of those words that he used within the tweet are really also what has been a big focus, saying that he knew ahead of time that it was going to be wild on Capitol Hill, especially when he's asking all of his supporters to come during a very important date, and that's recounting some of those electoral votes.
Yes, exactly. And what the committee did after they recounted that timeline up to this late night meeting and then this late night tweet was they showed how Trump's supporters understood exactly what he meant with that tweet, which was an invitation to come to Washington, D.C. on January 6th. They showed people like Alex Jones talking about how, this was this historic call to action, that this would be Trump's last stand. And in a sense, it really was. As the committee has laid out, he tried to pressure state election officials. That failed. He tried in courts. He lost case after case after case, including in front of judges that he himself appointed. He had failed in every respect to overturn the vote of the people. And this was really his last stand by getting these extremist groups to come to Washington.
And I know, too, like you mentioned, there was a number of different people he had meetings with, whether it would be phone conversations or in-person meetings, where he really was trying to look at every single avenue legally. What could his administration do to take steps to try to overturn that election? But it also shows a little bit of the other side of the issue, where every single turn he's taken, they're saying, nope, this was the decision that was made by the American people. They went out and voted. Here's what came of it. And yet it just wasn't something that was sinking in with him.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that is really what this story has been about. Trump keeps looking for different avenues to hold on to power. He keeps looking for a state official, in Georgia who will find these votes for him. He keeps looking for these, unhinged constitutional theories from John Eastman, who we've heard a lot about in previous hearings. He's looking and looking for ways to hold on to power until this ultimate point on January 6th, where he calls these extremist groups in that tweet. That's what the committee is alleging. He invites them to come to Washington and try to disrupt that constitutional transfer of power.
It was certainly quite the disruption. I want to continue with this conversation. Again, we're speaking with Elizabeth Wydra. who is a Constitutional Accountability Center's president. We do appreciate you being here. We are taking a live look in Capitol Hill, where we have yet another January 6th hearing happening. We've been in these in depth for you each and every single time they have happened. Here again, we do have our select member committees speaking about all of the events surrounding that January 6th insurrection. So we have been also speaking with Elizabeth Wydra. She has been giving us a legal point of view, a little bit of a breakdown of what's been happening here. We do appreciate your time here today, Elizabeth. And I just kind of want to get into some of these witnesses we're going to be seeing from, and the committee itself. They're really trying to lead us up to a big, probably wild end, which was that insurrection when people had stormed into the Capitol.
Absolutely. It's, I think what we've seen up to this point in the committee hearing is we've gotten to the point where Trump puts out his "it's going to be wild" tweet. And we saw the reaction from major high-profile members of extremist groups and sort of more violent Trump supporters who were saying that they were going to come armed and ready. And what I think we're going to see with the witnesses is more of a discussion of that part of things. We understand that one of the witnesses will be one of the key people in the Oath Keepers organization, and another person who was in that mob on the day of the January 6th insurrection. Now, I think this will be an important part of the broader story of a conspiracy to thwart the peaceful transfer of power. What the committee has been putting on is evidence that Trump knew that he lost, his team knew that he lost, they knew there was no evidence of widespread election fraud sufficient to overturn the will of the people as they voted in the 2020 election. And now we're getting to the point where Trump has put out this call to action, which some took as a call to arms, to come to January 6th and storm the Capitol to try to stop that peaceful transfer of power that the people in America had voted to transfer to President Biden.
And two, when we're thinking about what is the whole conclusion, what's the point of holding all these hearings? It is all about that accountability of there was a lot of behaviors, a lot of things that were demonstrated that led to that event on January 6th that really riled people up enough to the point where they were pushing past police officers. They were storming into the Capitol and even then breaking a number of laws once they were inside of the Capitol as well.
Breaking a number of laws, in the case of officials, breaking an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. And also people died that day. I think it's important to remember. But I think what the committee is going to wrap up ultimately with is that this was not just a broad, ongoing effort to overturn the election and thwart the constitutional transfer of power, but that it's an ongoing threat. Even this morning, Trump put out on his social media channel, again, these lies about the election, that it was somehow rigged. And so I think what they're going to wrap up with is that there needs to be accountability for what happened in the past, and there needs to be protections in order to preserve democracy and protect the ability of the American people to choose their leaders for themselves going forward.
Well, and I like that you pointed that out too. It's not just about looking into what happened. It's also to look forward to how do we prevent something like this happening again, because you never know the next time around, could it have been something that was successful, that they were able to interrupt it and take away those important ballots that they were recounting.
Absolutely. There was, there wasn't a complete disruption of the constitutional transfer of power. There was a delay, and that is serious. And the next time it could be even worse. And I think what we've seen through this hearing are a series of ways in which there was, in some ways by chance, in some ways just by a single or small group of individuals standing up and saying, no, we will not be party to this unlawful attempt to thwart the voice of the people. It didn't happen in the worst possible way on January 6th, but I think what the committee takes very seriously is its responsibility to ensure, with accountability for what happened in the past, that doesn't happen in the future.
So once these hearings are concluded, what do you think is going to be happening with movements forward when it comes to consequences for our former president, President Trump? Because obviously that's what they're leading up to, is a possible indictment.
So, the committee, that's not really their role in terms of, they don't have the power to indict. They could make referrals, but that isn't really the point of what they're doing. I think what they're doing for the criminal process, if there is an official state, local, or federal official out there to take up these charges, is making this painstaking evidentiary background of what happened leading up to around January 6th. And they've done, a year's worth of painstaking work through this bipartisan team, doing all of these depositions, all of these interviews, and really putting together this detailed case that a state or local or federal prosecutor could use for criminal charges. And that, I think, is a very real possibility. And I think that there needs to be some showing that no one is above the law, no matter who you are, no matter how powerful you are. And that is important for the American people to see.
And I think when you talk about, this committee, you did mention, it is have both Democrats and Republicans sitting there on the committee. I know that's been a little bit of controversy, too, even from some of the Republicans who say, they purposefully selected certain people to be part of their group. What are your thoughts on that when it comes to having a bipartisan group look into something like this, where it was something just so big and dangerous during that time, and now it definitely needs to be looked to in depth like they are right now?
Yeah, and I would point out that it's not just the members of the committee, but the members of the staff who are doing this investigation, who are very important, are bipartisan themselves. Many of them are really non-political actors at all. They're experts in national security, intelligence, other criminal prosecutions. And so, this staff is a real professional staff. This isn't, I know a lot of people want to paint it as political theater, but the professionalism of the staff has matched what we've seen from the people on the committee, the soberness with which they have approached these events and this hearing, I think, are appropriate. A lot of them were in the building. They were afraid for their lives. They were afraid for their colleagues and their staffs. And so, it's hard to believe in some ways that attack on January 6th happened. But when you watch these videos, you see again just how frightening and how appropriate it is to approach this with soberness and a really careful look at what happened and how we can prevent it from ever happening again.
Right. And I think that's a great way of explaining it, too, is, they really need to be as careful as possible. It seems like they're trying to be as thorough. I guess, finally, Elizabeth, any final thoughts on what's more to come today that you're expecting, or even with these other final hearings that they're going to have scheduled?
Yes, I think we're going to see today, hearing from the people themselves who were in that insurrectionist mob or who helped summon that insurrectionist mob. We have the national media advisor to the Oath Keepers, which was one of these key, along with the Proud Boys, one of these key extremist groups that came to Trump's last stand on January 6th, as well as one of the individuals. And we'll hear from them how they felt that they were responding to President Trump's call to arms. And then I think what we're going to hear next week is what Trump himself was doing, or what he was not doing, perhaps more to the point, during that violence and that attack on American democracy on January 6th.
Yeah, we've heard a lot of people already having conversations surrounding that, how he needed to step in earlier in the day when he saw things had definitely been amping up even more throughout the day. What we're going to do, though, is we appreciate your time here today. We're going to continue staying on top of this in full coverage. But again, Elizabeth Wydra, we appreciate all of your breakdown here. And we're going to say goodbye to you. But of course, we're going to continue waiting for our committee members to come back in here. So thank you again, Elizabeth. We appreciate you here today.
Thank you for having me.